Hey Wesley, thanks for sitting down with us. Maybe we'll get started. Why don't you tell us your title and role and sort of a little bit about the company.
Okay, so I'm Wesley, one of the founders of MediaMonks. MediaMonks is a creative digital production shop that operates globally. We currently have 6 offices. In Amsterdam, which is headquarters, we have London, New York, LA, Singapore and Dubai. And we work for ad agencies translating big idea strategy to amazing digital work.
Awesome. So when you think about strategy, what does that mean to you? And what does that mean to MediaMonks?
It's an interesting question, especially from a digital perspective. I think strategy in general is what do we need to do from here to get somewhere else. In a digital space, I think a lot of that can be tactical as well. It's not just the 3-year plan. A lot of it is how do we react and act based on platforms, technology shifts, user behavior. So that, I think, from a MediaMonks perspective, is what we try and facilitate for agencies and brands.
And so, when you're working with the client, are you generally working with at the agency side? Is it a producer? Is it a account manager? Is it who is it on that side?
It's very broad. I think agency landscape is changing quite a bit. So I would say half of the time it's producer based with maybe some creative support. More and more you have a broader skill set at the agency side when it comes to digital. So it is quite, I think our role is to be quite flexible depending on the skill set at the agency side. Mm-hmm. If that's very digital or less so, we sort of amend where needed.
So what kind of strategy, when you guys are putting together the solutions that you create, are you getting the strategy directly from the client, or what kind of strategy are you adding back in the mix?
I think a lot of the times we are briefed with a goal. The goal is X, mm-hmm. and then we try and support the agency thinking with the digital sort of native element where we go to get to that. We would be doing this and using these technologies and platforms. But it is relatively tactical. It's trying to get a certain sales number, a certain number of people seeing the work, interacting with the work, talking about the work.
So from a measurements perspective, is that generally what drives it? Is sort of some analytical data point?
It's what should drive it. I think weirdly enough, because we've been in business now almost 15 years.
Yeah. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Knock on wood. I think 15 years ago, the whole analytics space was very sort of new, but you felt that was going to be solved relatively quickly. Mm-hmm. I think we're still, even today, in situations where we're not quite sure what we're measuring and why we're measuring it, and it can be difficult to get actionable data. So we push to try and get at least a clear overview of what success is. That's our main question. What does success look like?
Yeah.
And then make sure we have a model in place to at least measure that.
Do you have a certain way that you go about trying to help clients define what success is?
Well, asking the question is an interesting start. Because sometimes I think, especially if it's sort of ongoing marketing calendar stuff, where we're doing a big campaign, it sort of almost becomes the de facto solution is we're going to do a big campaign, there's film there, there's a piece of digital, without taking a step back and going, but what should that campaign sort of facilitate beyond just people seeing it? Asking the question is the most important thing we do, because sometimes it opens up a really interesting discussion that maybe also switches the solution to something else.
And so we're here in Cannes, obviously, and one of the big topics is data, and you guys spend a lot of time working in that world, and obviously just in digital in general. How do you think data and creative are sort of coming together? Where's that intersection, and which one's influencing the other, and that sort of thing?
I think they are still quite separate worlds, and I think that is the area you see it most clearly, I think, is with programmatic advertising, where just from a technology perspective it facilitates so many great creative ideas, but I see that happen very little. And I've been in some juries where you either get the very sort of technical out of the box solutions, or you get creative thinking that doesn't fit the technology platform. Mm-hmm. So it still feels quite separate. I think the push for data has been happening here in Cannes for about 2 to 3 years now. Mm-hmm. I think it's seeping into some of the thinking. It's not at the level that I think it is the perfect marriage, where data is sort of the base and you put creativity on top of it. It's not really happening enough, I think.
Why do you think that is?
It's difficult to understand.
Yeah.
I think sometimes there's maybe a sense that data takes out some of the potential for the magic of creative thinking, where my feeling is, in the end, if we ever get the analytics part of our business good, we'll all have sort of the same level of data and insight, which makes it a bit more of a commodity, a very important one, but more of a commodity. And then creators should be using that to create sort of the magic and the difference. Maybe next year.
Maybe next year.
Not quite there yet.
So when you think about clients and strategy and data and just, from a resources perspective, attitude, what's a good client in this environment?
A good client is a client that does not brief a solution. I think we've seen that a few years. The trend was you would get a brief that already had the solution, which is it's a Facebook campaign, or it needs to be mobile, or we're going to be using HTML5. It gets very driven by buzzwords. I think at the moment the brief would be it needs to be virtual reality.
Yeah.
It needs to have a drone.
Yeah.
So I think the ideal client is very much this is the challenge, this is success. And then we have so many tools and opportunities and platforms. You try and come to the perfect solution based on that bit of information. That to me is a perfect client if you combine it with ambition and potentially a bit of budget.
Yeah, a bit of budget.
A bit of budget.
So what do you think when you think about, like you talked about next year, maybe we'll have data, but when you think into the future, sort of, what do you feel like is concerning, executives in sort of the advertising marketing space?
I think, from my perspective, it's user behavior more than anything. I think everybody keeps going on about mobile and social and data. We've had these sort of tools and platforms for a while now. In my mind, the way people use them it sort of accelerated and maybe escalated quite a bit the last 12 months. And you're just seeing completely different behavior on social channels. I think people are using their mobile for things we might not even have expected them to be using them for. I think people are getting used to digital-only products and services like Uber, like Netflix, which completely changes their expectation from brands. I think the sort of the interface is the brand is, I think, a really interesting takeaway. That's a challenge, because I think a lot of times marketing can be a bit removed from the actual product. But now more and more, especially when it comes to digital is the product. Mm-hmm. So to have that be separate worlds, I think is it's going to be the biggest challenge.
So when you think about delivering solutions like that to clients, what's a war story that comes to mind, right? So we kind of have an idea of like what's a good kind of client, but yeah. What's a bad situation?
We of course never have bad clients. Yeah. They're all special snowflakes.
Tough challenges. What's a recent challenge that comes to mind?
I think to me a challenge in general is when you work with brands that don't really have a clear view of their brand in the digital space, and you're doing their first big digital project. That's a challenge. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of branding and marketing, it gets defined everywhere but digital, and then if you're the first one out there, you're sort of the canary in the mine type situation. You're sort of solving a brand in the digital space, which is a challenging space to solve it in. So I would say those are the more, in some ways, the more interesting piece of work, but also the most challenging ones.
So what are you taking home from Cannes this year? What's your takeaway? What are you hoping to take home?
A few lions would be ideal, but
that was a layup question.
So what I'm actually quite interested about this year is the last few years we sort of got almost knocked over the head with one specific term each year. We had data, we had social, we had storytelling. I haven't sort of heard one pervasive term this year where everybody goes, this is the year of.
Yeah, right.
I think we had mobile, storytelling, data, and social somewhere in between as well. So I'm actually quite interested to see what the work is that's going to be winning, because I think the juries will be less focused on a trend this year. Or maybe we'll see a trend emerge just from the work that's being awarded.
Yeah.
So that's sort of my interest this year is, without that sort of spotlight on one specific term, what will win, and what do we think as an industry should win.
So the last, I'll let you go back to Cannes here in a minute, but the last question I want to talk to you about, just because it's interesting for you guys, how do you manage such a large organization scaled across several different offices when you're delivering these super complex solutions? And really, how does the clients not see that or see it? You know what I mean? How far does that the challenges sort of travel up the line, and how do you manage all that?
I think we manage it by shouting a lot, lots of shouting and running around. I think so from an operational perspective, we have 24/7 spread, and then you can do one of two things. You can hide that from clients and see it as a disadvantage, or you can loop it into how you work. We very much try and do the second. So we're very transparent about which offices are working on what piece of the work. I think the challenge is workflow.
Yeah.
It's how do you manage to get people to work on the same piece of work if they're not in the same office. I think part of that is tooling, part of that is standards, part of that is mentality. I think we try and take our lead from big post-production houses that have sort of solved this. Places like the Mill, Technical, they have solved this. A lot of that, it comes with a high cost because a lot of it is technology focused. People need to have perfect access, real-time communication, shared screens. A lot of it is just facilitating people working together. And I personally think the industry that has showed us how to do it is post-production.
Yeah, interesting. So we talked a little bit about sort of like, what's interesting this year. What do you think we're talking about 5 years from now, Can?
That's a dangerous question. I try and never predict the future, especially not on camera. The big challenge at Cannes is going to be, Cannes likes new stuff.
Yeah.
Cannes likes going, I haven't seen this before, it's amazing creative, let's award it. The way digital is progressing is not new stuff. It's solving existing problems iteratively and making them better each and every year. As a festival, Cannes isn't really set up for that, which I think is going to be one of the interesting sort of discussions, because what I hope we'll be seeing more of is just brands putting amazing digital sort of platforms in place that get better and better and better each and every year.
Yeah, and that whole iterative process doesn't play well to like, what's the big splash? It's like, well, it's just the same splash we had last year, but it's better now.
Yeah, and it's really difficult to go, if it won something last year, why should we award it again? Can we award it again? So I think we're sort of at the edge of that becoming a huge problem, which either means Cannes adds more categories, but they already have quite a few, or we need to, as an industry, understand what digital in its ideal form is meant to do, which is not just campaigns, it's solving problems between brands and users and communicating between those sort of groups, and that's a different process.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate you sitting down with us.
Likewise.
Let's get back to it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Have a good year.